If you're struggling in life, you might be in awakening stage 2. Stage 2 brings confusion and breakdowns, but it leads to growth. The phone rings at 3 a.m. and you're already awake. Not because of insomnia, but because something deeper is stirring within you, something that doesn't follow the normal rhythms of human existence. You've been here before, lying in darkness, while your mind races through thoughts that feel both foreign and familiar. Your friends think you're going through a phase. Your family suggests therapy. Your colleagues whisper about burnout. But deep down, you know this isn't depression, anxiety, or any conventional psychological category that modern medicine has labeled and medicated. What you're experiencing is stage 2 of spiritual awakening. In the most misunderstood, most painful, and most crucial phase of human consciousness evolution. Dr. Joe Dispenza calls it the biological death of the old self. Carl Jung termed it the dark night of the soul. Eckhart Tolle describes it as the dissolution of the false identity. But regardless of the terminology, one truth remains constant. You're not having a breakdown. You're having a breakthrough that's so profound, it's literally rewiring your brain, your energy field, and your entire relationship with reality. The confusion you're feeling isn't a sign that something's wrong with you. It's evidence that something's finally going right. For the first time in your life, you're operating outside the comfortable boundaries of conditioned thinking and societal programming. Your consciousness is expanding beyond the limitations that have kept you small, predictable, and manageable. The breakdown isn't the problem, it's the solution to a problem you didn't even know you had. Most people spend their entire lives trapped in stage 1 of consciousness, what spiritual teachers call the sleep of ordinary awareness. In this stage, your identity is completely constructed from external sources. Your job title, your relationships, your possessions, your achievements, your failures, your roles as parent, partner, professional citizen. Your sense of self is a patchwork quilt sewn together from other people's expectations, society's definitions of success, and unconscious patterns inherited from generations of ancestors who never questioned whether there might be another way to exist. Stage 1. Consciousness operates like a sophisticated prison designed to feel like freedom. You have choices, but they're all variations of the same theme. You can choose your career, but only from socially acceptable options that maintain the economic system. You can choose your relationships, but only with people who reinforce your existing identity and don't challenge your fundamental assumptions about life. You can choose your beliefs, but only from the menu of options provided by your culture, religion, or peer group. This isn't conscious choice, it's unconscious compliance disguised as personal freedom. The transition from stage 1 to stage 2 usually begins with what Gabor Mate calls the awakening of authentic need. Something inside you starts demanding more than the satisfactions that have sustained you up to this point. The promotions no longer provide lasting fulfillment. The relationships begin to feel hollow or draining. The activities that once brought joy now feel mechanical and empty. The beliefs that once provided certainty start crumbling under the weight of lived experience. You find yourself asking questions that have no comfortable answers. Is this all there is? Why do I feel so empty despite having everything I thought I wanted? What's the point of any of this? These questions aren't signs of ingratitude or depression. They're the first stirrings of your soul attempting to break free from the constraints of conditioned existence. Ram Dass often spoke about this moment as the divine discontent, the sacred dissatisfaction that arises when your higher consciousness begins to outgrow the limitations of your current identity. It's uncomfortable precisely because it's supposed to be. Comfort is the enemy of growth, and your soul is no longer interested in comfort. It's demanding evolution. The neuroscience behind this transition is remarkable and terrifying in equal measure. Dr. Bruce Lipton's research reveals that when we begin to question our fundamental beliefs and behavioral patterns, We literally start dismantling the neural networks that have defined our personality for years or even decades. The brain begins pruning away connections that no longer serve while attempting to form new pathways aligned with emerging insights and expanded awareness. This neurological reorganization creates a period of profound disorientation as your mind struggles to function without its familiar operating system. Imagine trying to rebuild the engine of a car while driving down the highway at 70 miles per hour. That's essentially what your brain is attempting during Stage 2 awakening. You're trying to maintain basic functionality in your daily life, while simultaneously undergoing fundamental psychological and neurological reconstruction. No wonder you feel confused, exhausted, and sometimes barely functional. You're performing one of the most complex operations possible for a human being, conscious evolution, without a manual, without support, and often without understanding what's actually happening. Rupert Sheldrake's work on morphic resonance provides another crucial piece of this puzzle. He suggests that when someone begins operating from expanded consciousness, they're accessing information fields that exist beyond conventional reality. These fields contain possibilities for human development that most people never encounter because they're locked into the morphic patterns of ordinary awareness. Stage 2, awakening, involves learning to navigate these expanded fields while still maintaining enough connection to consensus reality to function in daily life. This dual existence, one foot in ordinary consciousness, one foot in expanded awareness, creates a cognitive dissonance that can feel maddening. You might find yourself in a business meeting discussing quarterly projections while simultaneously perceiving the profound emptiness of corporate culture and the spiritual poverty of modern life. You might be having dinner with friends who complain about the same problems they've been discussing for years, and you can suddenly see the unconscious patterns that keep them trapped. But you can't share this perception without seeming judgmental or crazy. Deepak Chopra describes this phase as living between worlds, no longer fully identified with your old self, but not yet established in your new identity. You're like a butterfly in the chrysalis stage where the caterpillar has dissolved, but the butterfly hasn't yet formed. This liminal space is inherently unstable and uncomfortable, but it's also where all transformation occurs. You can't rush through it or bypass it. You can only learn to navigate it with as much grace and patience as possible. The breakdown aspects of Stage 2 often manifest in multiple areas simultaneously. Your career might suddenly feel meaningless, even if it's successful by conventional standards. Relationships that once felt stable might become sources of conflict or disconnection. Your physical health might begin reflecting the internal chaos as your body attempts to process new frequencies of energy and consciousness. Sleep patterns. Appetite and energy levels often become erratic as your entire system recalibrates itself around emerging awareness. Caroline Myss explains this phenomenon through the lens of energy anatomy. She suggests that when someone begins awakening spiritually, their entire energetic system must reorganize itself to accommodate higher frequencies of consciousness. This process can create temporary chaos in all the systems, physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual, that were previously organized around lower frequency awareness. The breakdown isn't pathology, it's necessary reorganization. What makes Stage 2 particularly challenging is that the people around you are usually still operating from Stage 1 consciousness. They interpret your changes through the lens of their own experience, which means they see breakdown rather than breakthrough, mental illness rather than spiritual emergence, self-indulgence rather than authentic self-discovery. Their well-meaning attempts to help often involve trying to pull you back into patterns that you're organically outgrowing. Family members might express concern about your sudden changes, not recognizing that these changes have been building for years beneath the surface of conscious awareness. Friends might feel abandoned or judged when you're no longer available for activities that drain your energy or conversations that feel superficial. Professional colleagues might question your commitment when your previous driving ambitions no longer motivate you. The lack of understanding from your support system can intensify the isolation and confusion that already characterize this stage. Pema Chodron teaches about the wisdom of no escape, the recognition that trying to avoid or shortcut the difficulties of awakening only prolongs and intensifies them. Stage 2 consciousness requires developing a completely different relationship with discomfort, uncertainty, and chaos. Instead of seeing these experiences as problems to be solved, you must learn to see them as information about the transformation process itself. The confusion isn't something you need to eliminate. It's something you need to befriend and learn from. Alan Watts often spoke about the backwards law, the idea that trying too hard to feel better actually makes you feel worse, while accepting difficult feelings as natural parts of the process allows them to flow and transform organically. In stage 2, awakening this principle becomes crucial for survival. The more you fight against the breakdown process, the more painful and prolonged it becomes. The more you can surrender to the dissolution of your old identity, while trusting in the emergence of something new, so the more gracefully you can navigate this challenging transition. The spiritual traditions have always recognized the necessity of this difficult passage. In Christianity, it's called the dark night of the soul. In Buddhism, it's known as the bardo, the intermediate state between death and rebirth. In Hinduism, it's described as the burning ground, where old karma is incinerated to make space for higher consciousness. Indigenous cultures have vision quests, walkabouts, and other ritual initiations that formally acknowledge the necessity of psychological death and rebirth for spiritual maturity. But modern Western culture has largely forgotten about these necessary passages, leaving people to navigate them without context, support, or understanding. We've medicalized spiritual emergence, pathologized natural developmental processes, and created a society that's terrified of any experience that can't be controlled, predicted, or immediately resolved. This cultural amnesia around the awakening process makes stage 2 infinitely more difficult than it needs to be. Ken Wilber's work on developmental psychology provides a framework for understanding stage 2 as a natural and necessary phase of human growth, rather than a pathological condition requiring treatment. He describes it as the transition from conventional to post-conventional consciousness, a shift that involves questioning and eventually transcending the values, beliefs, and identity structures that were appropriate for earlier developmental stages, but become limitations as consciousness expands. This developmental perspective is crucial because it helps normalize experiences that might otherwise seem like evidence of mental illness or spiritual crisis. The confusion, emotional volatility, relationship difficulties, and existential questioning that characterize stage 2 aren't deviations from healthy development. They're integral parts of the process through which ordinary consciousness evolves into something more mature, integrated, and authentic. Dr. Stanislav Grof's research with altered states of consciousness revealed that what psychiatry often labels as psychotic breaks are frequently spiritual emergencies, intense, but ultimately healing processes through which the psyche attempts to reorganize itself around higher levels of awareness. His work demonstrated that when these processes are supported and understood rather than suppressed with medication, they often lead to significant improvements in psychological health, creative capacity, and life satisfaction. The key insight from Grof's research is that the human psyche has an innate wisdom about its own healing and development processes. The symptoms that characterize stage 2, awakening the anxiety, depression, disorientation, and identity confusion, are often the psyche's attempt to break free from limiting patterns and access more authentic ways of being. Fighting against these symptoms with conventional treatments can interrupt natural healing processes and prevent the breakthrough that the breakdown is trying to facilitate. This doesn't mean that professional support isn't valuable during stage 2 transitions. But it does mean that the support needs to come from practitioners who understand spiritual emergence, rather than those who automatically pathologize unusual experiences. Therapists trained in transpersonal psychology Spiritual directors, familiar with contemplative traditions, and healers who work with energy and consciousness can provide crucial guidance during this challenging phase. Thich Nhat Hanh's teachings on mindfulness offer practical tools for navigating Stage 2 consciousness with greater equanimity. His emphasis on being present with what is, rather than trying to change or escape difficult experiences, provides a foundation for working skillfully with the chaos of awakening. When you can learn to observe your confusion, anxiety, and disorientation with compassionate awareness rather than reactive resistance, these experiences become teachers rather than tormentors. The practice of mindful observation during Stage 2 involves developing what could be called metacognitive awareness, the ability to watch your thoughts and emotions without being completely identified with them. This creates a space of witnessing consciousness that remains stable, even when your personality structure is undergoing radical reorganization. From this place of witness awareness, you can observe the breakdown process with curiosity rather than terror, recognizing it as a natural phenomenon rather than a personal catastrophe. Jon Kabat-Zinn's work with mindfulness-based stress reduction demonstrates that regular meditation practice actually accelerates the neuroplasticity processes that occur during conscious development. Instead of trying to prevent or control the brain changes that characterize Stage 2, awakening mindfulness practice supports and optimizes them. The result is often a shorter, less traumatic transition period with more stable integration of new consciousness capacities. But mindfulness alone isn't sufficient for navigating Stage 2 successfully. The process also requires what might be called embodied integration, learning to ground expanded awareness in physical reality rather than getting lost in spiritual concepts or psychological insights. Many people become stuck in Stage 2 because they over-intellectualize their awakening experience, instead of allowing it to transform their actual lived experience. Wim Hof's work with breathing techniques and cold exposure provides powerful tools for embodied integration during spiritual emergence. His methods help regulate the nervous system during periods of intense change while building resilience for the ongoing challenges of expanded consciousness. The combination of conscious breathing, physical challenge, and mental discipline creates a foundation of embodied strength that can support the more subtle aspects of awakening. The body's role in Stage 2 awakening is often underestimated, but it's actually crucial for successful navigation of this phase. Spiritual emergence isn't just a psychological or energetic process, it's a whole system transformation that includes significant changes in physical functioning. Learning to support your body during this transition through appropriate nutrition, exercise, rest, and body work can dramatically influence how smoothly the process unfolds. Bessel van der Kolk's research on trauma and the body reveals that many of the physical symptoms that arise during Stage 2, the fatigue, digestive issues, immune system fluctuations, and nervous system sensitivity, are actually the body's attempt to release stored stress and conditioning from earlier developmental phases. Rather than treating these symptoms as separate health problems, it's often more effective to understand them as integral parts of the consciousness evolution process. The relationship between spiritual awakening and physical health is complex and often counterintuitive. While expanded consciousness ultimately supports greater vitality and well-being, the transition process itself can temporarily destabilize physical systems. This is why many wisdom traditions emphasize the importance of physical purification practices, not from moral judgment, but from practical recognition that the body needs support during consciousness transformation. Louise Hay's work on the mind-body connection provides insight into how belief system changes during Stage 2 can manifest as physical symptoms. As old mental and emotional patterns dissolve, the body often expresses the release through various forms of detoxification, physical, emotional, and energetic. Understanding this process can help normalize experiences that might otherwise create additional anxiety about health and well-being. The social dimensions of Stage 2 awakening are perhaps the most challenging aspects of this developmental phase. As your consciousness expands, you naturally outgrow many of the relationships, communities, and social structures that previously provided identity and belonging. This outgrowing process isn't a rejection of others, it's a natural consequence of operating from different developmental levels with incompatible values, interests, and ways of understanding reality. Don Miguel Ruiz's teachings about the dream of the planet help explain why relationships become so difficult during stage 2. He describes how human societies create collective agreements about reality that most people never question. These agreements determine what's considered normal, valuable, successful, and meaningful within any given culture. When someone begins awakening, they start questioning these collective agreements and eventually stop participating in them unconsciously. This withdrawal from collective dreaming often feels like betrayal to family members and friends who are still identified with conventional reality. They may experience your questions and changes as implicit criticism of their choices and beliefs. Your growing authenticity can trigger their own suppressed longings for meaning and freedom, creating discomfort they may project back onto you as judgment about your phase or crisis. Marianne Williamson's work on spiritual psychology emphasizes that relationship difficulties during awakening are opportunities for deeper healing and more authentic connection. Rather than seeing conflict and disconnection as problems to be avoided, she suggests approaching them as invitations to practice unconditional love and conscious communication. This doesn't mean sacrificing your growth to maintain relationships, but it does mean learning to honor others' developmental process while remaining true to your own. The key insight about relationships during stage 2 is that some connections will naturally fall away, while others will deepen and transform. Attempting to maintain all relationships at their previous level usually creates unnecessary suffering for everyone involved. Learning to trust the organic process of relationship evolution, allowing some connections to release while welcoming new alignments, is essential for successful navigation of this phase. Often, stage 2 awakening involves discovering that many relationships were based on shared unconsciousness rather than genuine compatibility. When you're no longer available for complaining, gossiping, or enabling others' victim stories, relationships that were built on these dynamics naturally dissolve. This can feel like loss, but it's actually the clearing of energetic space for connections based on mutual growth rather than mutual limitation. The loneliness that often characterizes stage 2 isn't just social isolation, it's existential isolation. You're discovering that the identity you thought was you was largely constructed from external sources, and as this false self dissolves, you may temporarily feel like you don't know who you are at all. This identity confusion is normal and necessary, but it can be profoundly disorienting for people who have never questioned their sense of self. Mooji's teachings about self-inquiry provide tools for navigating identity dissolution with greater ease. His emphasis on distinguishing between the person and the presence that observes the person helps create stability during periods when personality structure is fluctuating rapidly. By learning to identify with awareness itself rather than with any particular content of awareness, you can maintain continuity of being even when everything else is changing. The practice of self-inquiry during stage 2 involves repeatedly asking, "Who am I beyond my roles, achievements, relationships, and circumstances?" This question gradually dissolves identification with temporary aspects of experience, while revealing the permanent ground of being that remains constant through all changes. This shift in identity from form to formlessness provides a stable foundation for navigating the chaos of conscious development. Carl Jung's work on individuation describes stage 2 as the necessary dissolution of persona, the social mask we wear to fit into collective expectations. He recognized that this process is inherently disruptive because the persona provides not just social acceptance, but also psychological structure and meaning. Learning to function without this familiar scaffolding while developing more authentic ways of being requires enormous courage and patience. The individuation process that Jung described involves integrating previously unconscious aspects of the psyche, what he called the shadow, while differentiating from collective identification to discover your unique essence and purpose. This is profoundly different from self-improvement within existing identity structures. It's actually a process of discovering who you are beneath all the layers of conditioning and adaptation that have accumulated throughout your lifetime. Shadow integration during stage 2 often involves confronting aspects of yourself that you've spent years or decades trying to deny or control. Anger you've suppressed in service of being nice. Sadness you've avoided through constant activity and achievement. Fear you've hidden behind personas of confidence and control. Desires you've judged as inappropriate or selfish. This confrontation with previously rejected aspects of self is essential for wholeness, but it can temporarily destabilize your sense of identity and moral certainty. The emergence of shadow material during awakening is often mistaken for regression or psychological pathology. People may worry that they're becoming worse rather than better as they become aware of thoughts, feelings, and impulses they previously kept unconscious. But this increased awareness isn't evidence of deterioration, it's evidence of integration. You can only heal and transform what you're willing to acknowledge and accept as part of your current experience. Gabor Mate's work on addiction and authenticity reveals that many of the coping mechanisms people use to manage stress and emotional pain actually prevent the natural development processes that lead to psychological maturity. During stage 2, awakening, these coping mechanisms often stop working effectively, forcing conscious engagement with feelings and situations that were previously avoided or numbed. This can manifest as the sudden inability to tolerate alcohol, drugs, or other substances that previously provided relief. It might appear as increased sensitivity to violent or disturbing media content. It could involve the breakdown of workaholism, shopping addiction, or other behavioral patterns that previously managed anxiety and emptiness. These changes aren't moral improvements, they're neurological adaptations to expanding consciousness that naturally seeks healthier forms of stimulation and satisfaction. The dietary changes that often occur during stage 2 reflect similar neurological adaptations. Many people find themselves craving lighter, cleaner foods while losing interest in heavy processed or ethically problematic options. This isn't usually the result of conscious decision-making, but rather an organic shift in what feels nourishing and supportive to an evolving energy system. Fighting against these natural inclinations often creates additional stress during an already challenging transition period. Barbara Brennan's work on energy healing provides insight into why consciousness expansion often requires changes in lifestyle, diet, relationships, and environment. She describes how different levels of consciousness operate at different energetic frequencies, and maintaining higher frequencies requires eliminating or minimizing exposure to lower frequency influences. This isn't spiritual elitism, it's energetic hygiene necessary for sustainable development. The concept of energetic hygiene becomes crucial during stage 2, because your sensitivity to subtle influences increases dramatically, while your tolerance for density and unconsciousness decreases proportionally. Environments, people, foods, media, and activities that previously felt neutral or even enjoyable may suddenly feel draining or disturbing. Learning to honor these new sensitivities rather than overriding them is essential for maintaining equilibrium during the awakening process. This increased sensitivity often extends to psychic and intuitive phenomena that may have been dormant or ignored previously. You might begin experiencing prophetic dreams, telepathic communications, energy sensing abilities, or spontaneous healing capacities. These experiences can be exciting but also disorienting, especially if you don't have a framework for understanding and integrating them safely. Dolores Cannon's work on consciousness expansion and multidimensional awareness provides context for the unusual experiences that often characterize stage 2 awakening. Her research suggests that as consciousness expands beyond ordinary limitations, people naturally begin accessing information and abilities that exist outside conventional reality paradigms. Rather than treating these experiences as supernatural anomalies, she presents them as natural capacities that become available as consciousness evolves. The key to working safely with expanded psychic sensitivity is developing discernment about which experiences to engage with and which to simply acknowledge without attachment. Not every intuitive impression requires action, and not every psychic experience needs to be developed into an ability. Learning to receive expanded awareness gracefully while maintaining grounding in practical reality is one of the essential skills for Stage 2 navigation. Nassim Haramein's work on unified field theory provides a scientific framework for understanding how consciousness expansion might naturally lead to access to non-local information and abilities. His research suggests that consciousness itself is a fundamental field that connects all aspects of reality, and that individual consciousness can learn to access this field more directly as it evolves beyond the limitations of purely brain-based awareness. The creative explosion that often characterizes Stage 2 awakening reflects this expanded access to information and inspiration beyond ordinary mental processes. Many people discover artistic abilities, healing capacities, or innovative solutions to problems that seem to come from sources beyond their usual thinking patterns. This creative emergence is often one of the most positive aspects of the awakening process, providing tangible evidence that something genuinely new is developing. However, the creative flow of Stage 2 can also be overwhelming and difficult to channel constructively. Ideas, insights, and inspirations may arise faster than you can process or implement them. Learning to work skillfully with creative abundance, capturing what's valuable while releasing what's not immediately useful, becomes an important skill for maintaining productivity and sanity during this phase. Tony Robbins' work on peak performance provides tools for harnessing the expanded creative and intellectual capacities that emerge during consciousness development. His emphasis on clarity of vision, emotional mastery, and strategic action helps channel awakening insights into practical applications rather than allowing them to remain abstract realizations that don't translate into improved life circumstances. The challenge of integrating spiritual insights into practical living is one of the primary tasks of Stage 2 awakening. It's not sufficient to have profound realizations about the nature of reality if these realizations don't translate into greater effectiveness, fulfillment, and service in daily life. The goal isn't to transcend ordinary reality, but to transform your relationship with it based on expanded understanding and capability. This integration process requires developing what might be called embodied wisdom, the ability to live from expanded consciousness while remaining fully functional in practical reality. This involves learning to access intuitive guidance while maintaining analytical thinking, developing compassion without becoming codependent, and cultivating detachment without becoming indifferent to outcomes. The paradoxes inherent in embodied wisdom can be confusing during Stage 2 because they require holding seemingly contradictory perspectives simultaneously. You must care deeply about your growth and service, while remaining unattached to specific outcomes. You must develop strong boundaries while maintaining an open heart. You must take full responsibility for your experience, while recognizing that much of life is beyond personal control. Ram Dass's teachings about being here now provide guidance for navigating these paradoxes with greater ease. His emphasis on presence as the foundation for all spiritual development helps maintain stability during periods when everything else is fluctuating rapidly. By learning to anchor awareness in the immediate moment, rather than getting lost in concepts about awakening or anxiety about the future, you can maintain functionality regardless of how chaotic the transformation process becomes. The practice of presence during Stage 2 involves developing what could be called choiceless awareness, the ability to witness whatever arises in consciousness without immediately trying to change, understand, or escape it. This creates space for the natural intelligence of consciousness to operate without interference from ego-driven attempts to control the awakening process. Choiceless awareness is particularly valuable during the emotional volatility that often characterizes Stage 2. Feelings may arise with unprecedented intensity and seemingly little provocation. Emotional reactions that were previously manageable may become overwhelming. Learning to be present with emotional intensity without being consumed by it or trying to suppress it allows emotions to flow naturally without creating additional trauma or resistance. The emotional purification that occurs during stage 2 often involves releasing stored feelings from earlier life experiences that were never fully processed. This can manifest as sudden grief for losses that seemed resolved, anger about injustices that happened years ago, or fear about situations that no longer exist. Understanding that these emotional releases are part of a natural healing process can help prevent additional suffering through resistance or self-judgment. Somatic experiencing approaches developed by practitioners like Peter Levine provide tools for supporting the body's natural capacity to process and release stored emotional and traumatic material. These methods recognize that consciousness expansion necessarily involves nervous system reorganization, and they provide practical techniques for supporting this biological process, rather than trying to transcend or bypass it through purely mental or spiritual practices. The nervous system changes that occur during stage 2 often manifest as periods of hypervigilance, alternating with exhaustion difficulty, concentrating memory problems, and increased sensitivity to stimulation. These symptoms can be alarming if you don't understand them as natural adaptations to expanding awareness, rather than signs of pathology. Supporting your nervous system through this transition with appropriate rest, nutrition, exercise, and stress management becomes crucial for maintaining basic functionality. Sleep disturbances are particularly common during stage 2 because the brain is undergoing significant reorganization during both waking and sleeping hours. Dreams may become more vivid, frequent, and meaningful. Sleep patterns may shift dramatically with some people, requiring much more rest, while others find they need significantly less. Learning to work with these changing sleep needs rather than fighting against them usually results in better overall rest and recovery. The dream life that emerges during stage 2 often provides valuable guidance for navigating the awakening process. Dreams may offer symbolic representations of internal changes, guidance about practical decisions, or direct teaching from what appear to be higher sources of wisdom. Developing a practice of dream recording and interpretation can provide valuable support during periods when waking consciousness feels chaotic or confused. Jung's work on dream analysis provides a framework for understanding how the unconscious communicates through symbolic imagery during periods of psychological transformation. His approach to dreams as compensatory messages from the psyche's wisdom can help decode the guidance that often emerges through sleep consciousness during awakening phases. The synchronicities that frequently occur during stage 2 provide another form of guidance and confirmation that the awakening process is unfolding appropriately. Meaningful coincidences, unexpected opportunities, and timely encounters with helpful people or resources often increase dramatically during consciousness transitions. Learning to recognize and respond to synchronicities can accelerate the awakening process while providing reassurance that you're supported by intelligence beyond your personal planning and control. However, it's important to develop discernment about synchronicities to avoid the spiritual materialism that can arise when people become overly focused on signs and omens rather than inner development. Not every coincidence is meaningful, and not every meaningful coincidence requires specific action. The key is maintaining receptive awareness without becoming dependent on external validation for internal guidance. The financial challenges that often arise during stage 2 can be particularly stressful because they occur simultaneously with other destabilizing changes. Career shifts, relationship transitions, health expenses, and reduced productivity due to the energy demands of consciousness evolution can create significant economic pressure. Understanding that these challenges are often temporary consequences of necessary life restructuring can help maintain perspective during difficult periods. Many people find that stage 2 awakening involves discovering that their previous career path is no longer aligned with their evolving values and consciousness. This can create financial insecurity as they transition toward more authentic forms of work and service. Learning to navigate this transition gracefully often requires developing new relationships with money security and material success based on trust in life's intelligence, rather than control through conventional planning. The spiritual bypassing that can occur during stage 2 represents one of the primary dangers of this developmental phase. When awakening insights are used to avoid practical responsibilities or difficult emotions, rather than to engage with life more skillfully, the result is often prolonged instability and eventual regression. True spiritual development enhances your capacity to handle practical reality, rather than providing escape from it. Common forms of spiritual bypassing during stage 2 include using meditation or spiritual practices to avoid dealing with relationship problems, financial responsibilities, or health issues. It might manifest as premature forgiveness that bypasses necessary boundary setting or grief processing. It could involve using spiritual concepts to justify irresponsible behavior, or to avoid the hard work of practical skill development. The antidote to spiritual bypassing is what might be called integrated spirituality, an approach that uses spiritual insights to engage more fully with all aspects of human existence, rather than transcending or avoiding any particular dimension of experience. This requires developing both transcendent awareness and practical competence simultaneously, rather than privileging one over the other. John Wellwood, who coined the term spiritual bypassing, emphasized that genuine spiritual development requires what he called psychological work alongside contemplative practice. This involves developing emotional intelligence, communication skills, and psychological maturity, rather than assuming that spiritual insights automatically resolve practical and interpersonal challenges. The integration of psychological and spiritual development during stage 2 often requires working with trained professionals who understand both domains. Therapists with transpersonal training, spiritual directors with psychological sophistication, or coaches who work with consciousness development can provide invaluable support during this complex transition period. The duration of stage 2 varies dramatically from person to person, depending on factors like the intensity of the awakening catalyst, the amount of previous inner work, the level of support available, and the degree of resistance to change. Some people move through this phase in months, while others may take years to stabilize in expanded awareness. Attempting to rush or control the timing usually prolongs the process rather than accelerating it. The completion of stage 2 is marked by what might be called integrated stability, the capacity to function effectively in practical reality while maintaining access to expanded consciousness. This doesn't mean that all challenges are resolved or that further development stops. Rather, it indicates that the major identity restructuring has stabilized and that expanded awareness has become integrated into daily functioning, rather than remaining a separate or destabilizing experience. Signs of successful stage 2 completion include emotional stability without suppression, authentic relationships based on mutual growth rather than mutual limitation work or service that aligns with expanded values and capabilities, physical health that reflects energetic alignment and a sense of purpose that transcends personal satisfaction while including personal fulfillment. The transition from stage 2 to stage 3 consciousness involves what could be called conscious service, the capacity to use your expanded awareness and capabilities in service of something larger than personal development. This doesn't necessarily mean formal teaching or healing work, but rather living in a way that naturally contributes to collective consciousness evolution. Through your example, presence, and authentic expression. Stage 3. Consciousness is characterized by what Ken Wilber calls post-conventional or integral awareness, the ability to include and transcend previous developmental levels while maintaining full functionality at all necessary levels of consciousness. This integration allows for effective engagement with conventional reality while maintaining access to transpersonal awareness and capabilities. The key insight about Stage 2 awakening is that it's not a problem to be solved, but a natural developmental process to be navigated with as much skill and support as possible. The confusion, breakdown, and chaos that characterize this phase are not obstacles to awakening, and they are the awakening. Learning to work skillfully with these experiences, rather than resisting or trying to escape them, is what allows the transformation to complete itself successfully. Understanding Stage 2 as a necessary passage rather than a pathological condition can dramatically reduce the suffering associated with consciousness evolution. When you know that disorientation is temporary, that breakdown leads to breakthrough, and that the chaos serves the purpose of reorganizing your entire system around higher levels of awareness, you can navigate the process with greater trust and patience. The support systems that are most helpful during Stage 2 are those that understand spiritual emergence as a natural and healthy process, rather than something that needs to be fixed or eliminated. This might include transpersonal therapists, spiritual teachers with practical wisdom, energy healers who work with consciousness, evolution support groups for people undergoing spiritual awakening, and friends or family members who can provide understanding and encouragement without trying to rescue you from necessary growth processes. Perhaps most importantly, Stage 2 awakening requires developing a new relationship with uncertainty and not knowing. The familiar landmarks of identity, relationship, and purpose may dissolve before new ones emerge, leaving periods of genuine groundlessness that can only be navigated through trust in life's intelligence and your own capacity for conscious evolution. This trust is not blind faith, but rather confidence based on direct experience of consciousness as a self-organizing, self-correcting, and inherently intelligent force. As you learn to cooperate with this intelligence rather than trying to control it, the awakening process becomes less chaotic and more graceful, though it never becomes entirely predictable or comfortable. The gift of successfully navigating Stage 2 consciousness is the discovery that you are far more resilient, creative, and capable than you previously imagined. The breakdown that felt like annihilation reveals itself as breakthrough into authentic power and freedom. The confusion that seemed like mental illness transforms into clarity about your unique purpose and gifts. The isolation that felt like abandonment becomes recognition of your connection to something infinitely larger and more meaningful than personal identity. Most importantly, completing Stage 2 provides the foundation for genuine service to collective consciousness evolution. Having navigated the treacherous waters of identity dissolution and reconstruction, you develop the capacity to assist others who are undergoing similar transitions. Your breakdown becomes their breakthrough, your confusion becomes their clarity, your struggle becomes their strength. This is the ultimate purpose of Stage 2. Awakening not just personal transformation, but preparation for conscious participation in the evolution of human consciousness itself. Every person who successfully navigates this challenging passage makes it easier for others to do the same, creating what Rupert Sheldrake would call a morphic field of support for collective awakening. The struggles you're experiencing aren't signs that something is wrong with you. They're signs that something is finally going right with a species that has been asleep to its true potential for far too long. Your breakdown is actually a breakthrough waiting to be born, and your confusion is actually clarity in its cocoon stage, preparing to emerge as wisdom that will serve not just your own evolution, but the transformation of consciousness on Earth.